with this new normal, what I thought I would do is just reiterate again, people first is really the most important consideration, because if you focus on the bottom line, yes, as managers, you have to focus on the bottom line, but without people and people who are happy, or people who feel well supported and cared about, and your bottom line is going to suffer, and that might come home to roost later on when we really need them to step up. So again, just, paying more attention to individuals and what their needs are. So I've asked Dawn O'Connor, who you might see on your screen. Dawn, you want to give a wave there? To speak to us. She works with executives around productivity and maximizing their productivity. And she's also a chapter chair for Women's President Association here or organization here in Calgary. So working with high income or high revenue business owners, and also peer group facilitator through the Chamber of Commerce as well. So when it comes to how we work best remotely and together, Dawn's a real expert on that. And she's been doing that for a long time. So Dawn, I'm going to turn it over to you, and for you to share some of your expertise. And then once we're finished that, similar to last week, we're going to split off into small groups. We've provided the questions you might have seen as an attachment in the email that we sent out. And those are questions that to discuss and maybe get some new ideas and just share some of the challenges that you've been facing trying to manage people remotely. So Dawn, if I can turn it over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. I really appreciate you having me on. And I do like that I can see all the faces. I've done some webinars recently where I'm the speaker, but nobody is on video and everybody's muted. It's like talking into a void of nothingness. And I find that very disconcerting. So it's lovely to see some faces. Thank you for coming on video. As Rochelle said, my background is working in productivity training and coaching, working with individuals and teams across Canada, across the US. I've been doing it for a really long time, maybe 20 years. And it's interesting, one of the programs that we teach is how to run effective meetings. And so I'm really going to focus today on the meetings piece, because I know that sounds really boring. And I'm glad, Rochelle, you didn't promote this as a meetings workshop, because then people might not have shown up. But whenever we teach this workshop, whenever we work with our clients in this capacity, the learning is really extraordinary. It's really tangible. It's measurable. We see the outcomes. And Rochelle is talking about communication. And last week, I don't know how many were on the call that you guys had last week with Jason, can't think of his last name.
Mercier.
Yeah, and he had some great messages. It was so simple. I was listening to him when I wrote down internal versus external. Start internal, communicate with your people extensively. He said something else about regularly and randomly. And what I realized is the things that stuck with me are these little 2-word phrases and these little sound bites, because we're so inundated right now with information. I'm going to try and share some productivity little sound bites with you that you can take away and actually apply in your real world, in your day-to-day. So your reality has been disruptive, to state the obvious. And I think disruption is potentially a wonderful thing, because it forces us out of our comfort zones. And it takes something dramatic often to have us shift our habits and shift our cultures as well. So I'm going to make some assumptions about your work environment. I've done a little bit of research background on some of the companies here. I read Associated's president's announcement yesterday about the status of your office and how that's functioning. So that gave me a little insight. So I'm going to make an assumption that you're somewhere on the spectrum of, you've moved probably away from a traditional cubicle land office work environment where most people are physically showing up and are there 9 to 5. And you're probably migrating or in some stage of migration towards virtual, either exclusively virtual or some blended approach in between, where you have folks still in an office, but in, I think, oh, those folks in the office, aren't they lucky they get to go in still and have that routine? But I'm guessing it's fairly isolating for them being in that office alone, 2 meters from somebody else and shouting across a kitchen and having different facilities to use, et cetera. So I don't think it's necessarily a fabulous scenario. So what I want to look at is how when you communicate with your teams via meetings, how you can do that really effectively in the virtual world. So if you've moved away from physical meetings into the virtual, which is likely what most of you are doing. I'm going to, sorry, my dog is driving me crazy. She's scratching at my door to get in and I can't concentrate. So I'm going to let her in and then I can refocus. And that's, I think, what a lot of your staff are dealing with, right? The realities of being at home. I want to talk about one-to-one meetings first. And what I'm going to say about one-to-ones, and this has been applicable for the last 20 years that I've been working with folks, is frequency trumps duration. So have short, frequent meetings, be in front of them, be with them as much as you possibly can, versus, you know, maybe you had a schedule of an hour a week or every couple of weeks you'd get together and you'd have a little one-on-one with your staff or with your manager, your leaders who are above you potentially. If you have the ability to increase those and make them a little bit shorter and have those touch points, they'll be more impactful in the long run. And I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle here just to speak a little bit more about individual attention that your staff.
One of the things we've been talking with our clients about is how, you know, similar in the workplace, you're going to have people on your team that connect more, they're more extroverted, they're going to be reaching out, they're going to want to, they'll be asking you more questions. And in the busyness of working from home and trying to make sense of it all, you know, they get the most attention. Just probably at the office too, they get the most attention. So in order to be really intentional about dividing up the amount of time we speak and one-on-ones is to think about having a plan for each person. Some of you have heard me talk about that, you know, it's a coaching plan for each person. But in this context, you know, what hours is it best for them to work at home? If they've got young kids with no daycare, chances are that that's going to be a little bit different than maybe for you if your kids are grown and out of the home. So if you have a plan that, you know, what time is best for them to work, find the overlaps between them and you as their supervisor and them as the team, so you can schedule meetings where everyone can be present comfortably and without a lot of stress. What level of communication do they require? So think about their strengths. Are they introverted, extroverted? Do they need a lot? Do they need more? Is their performance at a level where you need to be spending more time? Because now maybe you have the time to help them up their performance game. What support do they need from you? And then create this sort of non-judgmental schedule of how the team can work better together. And it's probably going to look a lot different than it did at the office.
I love the language of non-judgmental schedule. And I think about, if we're talking about sort of a spectrum of working from a traditional office right up to the other end of the world, which would be called a ROWE work environment, which is ROWE, a results-only work environment, which is a bit of a mythical creature. It's like a unicorn of the work environments where it doesn't, the theory is it doesn't matter where you work or when you work, we're solely looking at outcomes. What is it that you are producing? What impact are you making? And we are now being pushed closer to ROWE work environments just by necessity. And we are needing to be less concerned about physically seeing someone sit at their desk 9 to 5 and be concerned about what they're actually doing. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with that philosophy and are naturally having a culture of a results-only work environment, but keep that in mind as sort of that end of the spectrum. And the way Rochelle touched on it is that would allow someone who's got kids at home to homeschool for 4 to 6 hours a day potentially, although I believe you can homeschool in like 2 hours and do as much as the school day would have done in 6 hours. So there's advantages there, but then it would allow you to what would be meaningful for that person? Could you possibly meet with them at 7 o'clock in the evening? You know, it's asking a lot of leaders now to be so flexible on this range of things. And all I would say is put on your oxygen mask first and then take care of others. So my big approach and philosophy is working with individual leaders and making sure that you are shored up, you've got the energy reserves, you've got the plan in place for your own personal productivity. That way you're effective and you can delegate and manage appropriately. So I'm going to talk about meetings, which maybe is not exciting to people, but is like one of my absolute most favorite workshops to deliver is around running effective meetings. And I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 key points. They will not be rocket science. This is pretty common sense stuff. And you may or may not actually be doing it on a regular basis. These are things that, it's interesting. I was talking to a lawyer yesterday who went to one of our webinars last week, and she said, you know, I know all that stuff. I've heard it all before. I appreciate hearing it. And then she said, and I'm actually now having to implement it really well for the first time. So she said, as I knew it, but I wasn't doing it. So I really want to bridge that knowing, doing gap with some things. So I think you all know that having a clear meeting purpose would be a fundamental kind of tenet of an effective meeting, is defining why is it that we're showing up and what are the expected outcomes. So I'm just going to tell a little story about this. We did a big project with BC Hydro several years ago, and we were brought in by a department head of about 400 people. And she was running really good meetings at her leadership level, but it wasn't spilling down fully. And so she said she wanted all of her leaders and staff, most senior staff, to go through this series of workshops. And then she said, but I don't think I really need to attend. And I said, well, it's just for optics, you know, as the leader, I'd like you to be there physically at one or two of the sessions, just to make sure that you can carry through the language, etc. So she showed up and she loved it. And about 4 weeks later, she phoned me and she said, you know, I didn't think I needed it, but one thing fundamentally shifted for her. And that was having a clear meeting purpose. She had, you know, a vague idea of why she was, as the senior leader, she was invited to multiple meetings and said yes to multiple meetings, just kind of by default. And what she had done in the 4 weeks since the workshop was actually use meeting purpose as a criteria to decline or accept whether she should attend or to influence the direction of the meeting. So I would just by a show of hands in here, who feels like the core of your meetings has a very clearly defined written purpose in a written agenda? I'm going to put one more criteria that's distributed 24 hours in advance. Oh, what an honest audience. Lovely. So I'm getting like the hand means one piece is done, but the other ones aren't. Okay. And so it's a very simple, it's a simple way forward. It's basically about a 2-minute time investment to write a clear meeting purpose and to get your staff thinking about doing that when they're calling a meeting as well. And it can quite dramatically shift a number of things. One, it clarifies who should show up for the meeting. It allows the meeting to run more effectively because when you go off purpose, you can then bring it back to the purpose. And I'm going to talk a little bit about meeting roles. So the way I notice most companies run meetings is that there is a subject matter expert, usually a leader who is an expert in that area, maybe the project lead, team lead, department lead. They're the chair of the meeting and they run the show, and they often have a lot of influence over the outcomes. I don't know if anyone's heard this expression about the hippo in the room. The hippo in the room is the highest paid person's opinion. And I know it's not a great phrase, but it's kind of a fun one because it helps you realize that often that person does have significant influence over the outcomes of the meeting. So we want to look at how can we create more value in our meetings by having a clear purpose and more quality in roles. And I'm going to suggest a couple of roles that are even more important now in the virtual world than they were when we were meeting face to face. And one of them is to have a facilitator. And I'm not saying that you have to go hire someone external at all. You've got these people in your organization. And these are growth and development opportunities for junior staff or anybody, potentially introverted folks who maybe are the quiet ones at meetings. Now, a facilitator, you can call them a facilitator, a moderator, a process manager. It's someone whose role is fundamentally to guide the meeting from a process standpoint. So they're less concerned about content. They're there to help keep things on track. And we worked with an architect firm who had a whole series of these junior architects who were attending client meetings, and they didn't feel particularly useful. They were asked to take notes. And when we observed this, we did some audits, and they were good at taking notes, and that was great. That's an important role. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we realized that these guys had some really great qualities, and they actually could be facilitating the meeting in support of a chair or leader. And so they created a role to allow them to do that. And it became sort of a growth and development opportunity and for them to step into this sort of junior leadership role. So the skills that are involved in that is you want someone who's got good observation skills, who can be reading the room, looking around, checking in with people's faces, looking for the body language. Someone who has process orientation. So somebody who can say, oh, I'm noticing that we have gone down a rabbit hole. We're a little bit off topic. Our meeting purpose was defined as this. How can we get back to that? Or subsequently, maybe this new topic is more important and we're going to scrap the original purpose and move towards something else. But to bring that to the surface, I'm sure you've all been in a meeting where you've secretly been thinking, what are we talking about? Where have we gone with this topic? We're off base. And yet nobody says anything because no one's really been given that authority to, voice that. So if you assign the role and you give the person a little bit of guidance and some structure, it allows them to help keep that meeting on track and keep it focused. Two other little roles that are important are note taker, potentially, although what I'm loving about the virtual world is the chat box in Zoom. And so you can have a distributed note taker or a collective sharing of note taking, because if you have a key point, you can simply type it into the chat after you've shared it. And then you have, at the end, you've got a shared document. You can hit save on your chat and you've got your meeting notes right there. You can even get clever and do a little bit of a template in there and say, these are the points we want to capture. You can dump resources in there, links to things. So it's a brilliant way to sort of share that way of capturing your meeting and outcomes. So I'm always looking for who, by what, by when. So if there's actions, who's doing it, by when, who's got the accountability, and putting that in there. And you all probably have different meeting agenda templates in place that you're following, or maybe not, but I would love it if you did. And the chat can support you in that. The other little role that I love to see at a meeting is timekeeper, especially when we're in a virtual world and there's uncertainty about the order of speaking. The facilitator, for one, can say, okay, I see Roger looks like he wants to say something. I'm going to call on him next. Or they can simply assign an order, alphabetical or whatever it is, and put that in the chat box, and then people can follow that order for some meetings. Now, that's not always going to work. Sometimes it's more conversational. But again, having a facilitator there to help with the flow can be tremendously helpful. And then the timekeeper. So if you are doing something more structured, one of the meetings I facilitate that Rochelle actually participates in is everybody only has 3 minutes to give a very specific update on a forum, and we time it and it keeps it equal and balanced. And that works for that particular kind of meeting. In terms of meetings, I want to say one other thing, and that is to avoid meetings that are strictly updates. So meetings where you've got just status updates, I find are not super effective virtually. I don't think they're that effective in person. I know a lot of companies do have them, but in terms of doing it virtually, if you can encourage your folks to give a simple template, you're looking for 3 key things, what's going well, maybe a project status update, where are you stuck, have that written in advance, everybody submits, and then only address the things that are of importance, the challenges. So everybody can read the updates. It takes no time at all. You've got, say, a team of 7 to 10, and then you can focus on issue resolution and more positive outcomes versus just standing there or sitting there hearing, especially we're getting this screen fatigue. I don't know if anyone's experiencing this yet, but being on this all day and looking, our eyes are getting taxed and we're sitting in the same position. We're told, I'm told as a presenter to sit very still and not flail about, which is really uncomfortable. Normally I'd be standing and gesticulating and, it would be more physical and engaging. And it's funny when you as the audience are sitting watching, you're also sitting very still. So our energy levels are a bit static and stagnant. And that sends a message to our brains. And oh, thank you, Roger. I like Roger. He's like dancing over there. That's great. I appreciate that. So yeah, it starts to take its toll on us, all of this virtual world meetings. And so a couple of quick tips on that is even just shifting your focus, look above your monitor, try and have a horizon that's as far out as you can and let your eyes just sit quietly, 10 to 20 seconds. Give yourself breaks, little micro breaks throughout the day to rest your eyes.
And Dawn, can you, as part of the wrap up, can you just talk about humor? You and I spoke about that.
Yeah, I'm not a funny person. And I read this study and we cover it in our workshop about humor has a huge impact on productivity. And the more levity, and if you can tell a joke at the beginning or inject some humor into a meeting, everybody will walk away feeling better about it. And you will typically have better outcomes. They will be more productive meetings by criteria that we can use to measure that. So I always turn to my audience who, say, who in you is funny? And and I have one client who actually said, I talked to him about this yesterday, and he sent me a note saying this is what he's sending to his group every day before they start a meeting. And he sends some random weird picture of his 8 and 10-year-old doing weird stuff around the house. They have a costume box, and every day there's a different costume. So that's what he's doing to kick off the meeting. And then everybody has started sharing some random weird picture of their pet or their child. And it's just helping to connect us as humans and getting to know what happens outside of the world of the office. And thank you for that, Rochelle. I forgot that piece. I want to say one more thing that I forgot about introverts. One more, that's it. Introverts, they need 7 seconds sometimes. This is the magic number, that if you see someone sitting quietly and you open up their, let's say if I suddenly unmute somebody, I need to give them, as the facilitator or the moderator, 7 seconds to be ready to say something. And 7 seconds can feel like a really long time when you're sitting here on the virtual world. So
For an extrovert.
yeah, be patient with the introverts.
Thank you, Dawn. Wrap up on my end. There's some other best practices that I just wanted to leave you with in terms of how to manage a remote workforce. I talked about creating a plan for each team member. When it comes to people first, there may have to be layoffs. So that, when I say that, I don't mean like don't lay off at all costs. I mean, if you have to, for the bottom line, you have to. But again, people first is how we do that with kindness and caring and understanding. I have heard some people talking about, well, we had poor performers before, so now might be a good opportunity to lay them off because people are laying off anyway. I would just ask you to think about the flip side of that coin. And, in our busyness when we were at the office, did we spend enough time coaching them or being really forthright with them about what the gap is in performance that we needed them to improve? And if you have time now to dedicate to them and maybe put them on a performance improvement plan and talk to them about what things they could work on to improve, and give them like maybe a 3 month to see if they can step up. What I find is, 90% of the time, people will rise to that if we can give them the time and help them to do that. So before, the quick sort of, now's the time to lay people off, ask yourself, do you need them later? And do you feel they have potential? And then use your good coaching skills to do that. Decide what you want to give positive reinforcement for. Is it working long hours? Is it being innovative? Is it helping the team collaborate more? So the things that we want to reinforce now may be different than when everyone was working at the office. So some strategies around that would be helpful. Define and communicate your expectations. First of all, think about how your expectations are different in this new environment and communicate them often, consistently. Bring them up when you can in meetings, anywhere you can, so that people are very clear and it's reinforced what the expectations are and they all hear it. Delegate work based on people's strengths. If you've got a team member who is really helpful and supportive, those of you who've done the SDI, they're blue in the SDI, maybe say to them, could you please just check in with people and make sure that everyone is okay. Just see what their need is, because I'm going to be focused on a different area right now. And so delegate to your team based on strengths. Dawn touched on that earlier. The other one is decide who goes to who for what. So maybe the chain of communication around projects and issues needs to be formalized and different than being able to turn to your supervisors right beside you and say, hey, I'm not sure what to do with it, or, did the client call? So trying to streamline it so you don't have people coming to you for everything. Maybe there's different team members they can go to. And then the last one, just keep it light and fun. We talked about that earlier too. So those are some of the things that, maybe require some different consideration at this time. So those are a few things I wanted to leave you with. Any sort of last comments or topic ideas that people want us to think about? And we have access to a lot of different speakers and different professionals. Would like to bring you content that would be helpful.